Hello, Vasili.
Hey, Jeff.
It is great to have you on. You have a Kickstarter, which I noticed, but I also got access to some of your earlier works, and I must say that notably Quillis being, I think, one I remember most distinctly, especially from, I think, didn't Quillis 2 you launched for Zine Quest? Was it 2 years ago or last year?
Quillis 2 I just released on my own. I didn't actually do it as part of Zine Quest. I think I wanted to do something as part of Zine Quest, but for some reason I did it. But I just actually sort of published that kind of independently.
Yeah, it's there's the images stand out. So I didn't, when it first came out, did not pick it up, but I will tell you that the the zine, the stuff that you'd shown had made a very lasting impression in my psyche. How some images do. And what I found was interesting because it seemed like every zine you have done, at least each, I don't want to say each group, but you've done a Quillis, and you did Nightland, and they did was it Xanadu?
That's right. That's right.
Okay, and you seem to be taking a little different angle. But what was interesting was reading the introduction to Quillis. You talked about how you kind of, to summarize, kind of came back to D&D after kind of a period of time, and kind of found that the OSR group was a lot of blogging and a lot of, I won't say intellectual, but I mean, there's a lot of people treating it both as fun and serious both. I mean, we can treat it both. And then you decide, you know what, I'm going to do my heartbreaker. And then you said you wrote was it 1,000 pages of notes for Quillis?
I did, yeah. I started taking notes kind of in about maybe 2013 or 2012. And these were just kind of bullet points for kind of just weird stuff, really, just like imagery, scenes, kinds of ideas and things like that. And I just couldn't kind of work out how to actually make notes into something tangible, like put them on a page. I just had some kind of blockage, where I just couldn't really take them out of Google Docs and then actually put them on a page and make it into some kind of coherent form. And it wasn't until I thought of a name for a zine, which was a Quillis, that could be this kind of repository for these ideas. I mean, it really took that to kind of get any sense of, how I could actually sort of compile them into some kind of, book that I could make.
So these are kind of just really more or less, yeah, because I've had similar experience where you're not having to worry about taking 1,000 page of notes and making a 125-page hardback book. So the zine really kind of in this format. Are you planning on, in the end, once you, I guess, get a number of these out, recompile them into a more of a single work?
I'd sort of like to. I mean, I was really heavily influenced by Lovecraft's Dreamlands. And the work of Clark Ashton Smith. So I think Quillis has that kind of tone. I mean, it's very kind of surreal. The whole thing's very hallucinogenic. I mean, I'm not even sure if a lot of it makes sense or how gameable any of it is, to be honest. But I think what I'm planning to do is I've actually finished Quillis 3. And I actually was planning to release that as part of Zine Quest instead of this dungeon zine. But I think I'll probably release Quillis 3 at the end of the year. But I think once I have, say, like, I don't know, like say 5 issues or something like that, I'll probably release it as some kind of omnibus. And
yeah, that does make sense. Because I've noticed, to me, what it is that this is very much like Ben Lawrence's. Well, I say very much, I don't mean very much. I mean, it's like you and Ben Lawrence with Geraldton's Door almost like took a single point, originated from a single point, but took different directions with it.
Yeah, look, I mean, I'd sort of agree with that. Like, I actually love what Ben Lawrence does. I mean, I love those through Ulton's door zines, and I think conceptually it's kind of the same thing. It's kind of like going through a doorway into this like really strange kind of world, and all these kinds of ideas that that sort of come up within it with this kind of dream logic behind it. So I think you're right about that. Look, Through Alden's Door is probably my favorite zine out there at the moment.
Well, have you seen or do you have Ultraviolet Grasslands?
I do have that as well. I mean, that's another. I mean, that's magnificent as well. I mean, it's quite astounding that one creator actually does it all. That does the writing, the art, and the layout. I mean, it's kind of amazing, I mean, I wish I could. I mean, I do the layout and the writing, but not the art. But that's, yeah. I mean, they're the kinds of things that really interest me in especially like contemporary sort of games. Like this kind of dream world that's perhaps sort of genre fusion as well. This idea of having this sort of classic fantasy world, but with elements of sci-fi and post-apocalypse, and kind of an ambiguity as well. Like I sort of think of a Quillis as being set in the really far future.
Okay.
Like, something that's kind of maybe millions or billions of years into the future or something, or it could be the distant past. But I sort of tend to really enjoy reading stuff like that in RPGs, things that sort of, kind of take a tangent and, making them into these kinds of, personal, these kind of personal kind of world building,
Well, and you say personal kind of world building, because like if you look at like the through Ben's stuff, it's very localized. It's very much, but yours, and again, makes me think of, I don't want to say like Ultraviolet Grass because it was contemporary, but the idea is it's more, I don't want to say expansive, and I don't know how to describe it, but the idea is it feels more, it's not like a tight adventure. It's actually more like a loose experience. And kind of in some ways like a point crawl where not everything is highly detailed, but you also create a bunch of random tables to generate a unique feel every time it can be ran, really, right?
Yeah, that's right. I mean, look, I mean, I sort of see Quillis as just, it's just kind of ambience, really. It's just kind of, atmosphere and the random tables. Look, I mean, some people have told me they just read the random tables and they sort of get a lot out of it. Other people say that they've used it as a cue, for ideas in their own games. And I think a Quillis is really meant to be something like that. It's just really, it's just really a repository for ideas I just sort of have, and I thought sort of compiling it as a zine, which is staple bound and everything. I thought that was the best way to present it. I mean, if you look at the other book that I did, which was Nightland, I mean, that's kind of far more specific, that actually has, locations, and it's got the factions, and it's got the point crawl. It does have random tables, but that's kind of highly sort of specific. That's a specific area. And I kind of thought of Nightland as maybe being, a part of a Quillis as well. Maybe that's the dark side of a Quillis. Maybe a Quillis isn't, I don't know, permanent daylight, and Nightland's kind of, kind of the other side of it. But but with a Quillis, I mean, I just want it to be this kind of thing. Well, I have an idea, it's kind of weird, and what's the best way to present it? And I think, well, maybe the best way to present it is like a page in a zine, and maybe present it as a random table, or present it as a bit of information, which people can sort of, hopefully draw upon. So that, so I do want to keep a Quillis kind of fairly kind of loose in that sense, and because I do have a lot of ideas, and that seems to have sort of worked, and and the response has been really positive as well. Like, I mean, it's sort of built up like a small following now, and it feels like a it's just an area, the weird fantasy area is just, something that interests me, has interested me greatly for a few decades now. So it's just kind of this, it's just kind of this like personal musings, if you like, that take this form of a zine, and hopefully, people get something out of it.
Well, and I think there is something to be said because, a lot of times people with like more traditional modules, a lot of times will just enjoy reading them. And I think, there's always been the discourse of some of the, say, D&D model or Pathfinder being enjoyable to read versus usable at the table. But I think the idea is that you can just say, you know what, I'm just going to let my mind go. I'm going to put some stuff down. I'm not going to be worried about balance. I'm not going to be worried about this, but I'm going to present the information in a clear style with my vision and thoughts, and people can do with it whatever they want, and that's what's nice about it.
Yeah. Look, I mean, I have had people who've sort of said that, there's one kind of point crawl in the first issue of the Quillis, and a lot of people have said, it's kind of disjointed, and I'd agree with that comment, but I think that that's kind of what it is. It's just really meant to be like, it's just meant to be a bunch of sort of ideas, really, and I'm sort of okay with that, because that's just one project I've got going on at the moment, and that's just kind of what it is. So I sort of I sort of take those comments on board, but at the same time, I'm sort of really happy to kind of just run with it as well.
Yeah, and the other thing I think what's striking is, obviously, besides we'll talk about the layout later, because that's also really well done, is the choice of art. So obviously you went through for Quillis. I think probably most, if not all of the art is public domain artwork.
That's right.
But you didn't scour to find a picture of a unicorn, or scour the things to find a picture of a goblin. You chose some classical works and cropped them many ways, in a way that not necessarily maybe aesthetic, but maybe even kind of creating a sense of unease.
Well, that's exactly right. So what I did is, I think Quillis is really influenced by a lot of kind of older paintings. In art history, it's influenced by things like symbolist paintings, sort of mythical paintings, religious paintings, which to me really sort of capture a sensibility of what I'm trying to sort of what I'm trying to evoke. So what I do is I actually spend a lot of time looking for kind of public domain works. I mean, there's tons of sites. I mean, and what's kind of interesting is that a lot of museums now have actually put a lot of things into the public domain. And so what I do is I actually look for these works, and sometimes, the works themselves actually spark off the idea. So sometimes I'll actually have an image, and I think, I'll come up with an idea for that kind of image, which sort of might not relate directly, but it's just an image that, might spark, say, the basis of something. And I think what's, what the hardest thing to do is with public domain works, and this is why I spend so much time looking through them, is it's actually finding one that's of high quality enough to look good in print.
Right.
Because there are, because there are a lot of public domain works out there. I mean, there's kind of, I don't know. I mean, there's countless, but actually finding the right one, which is of good enough resolution to look good in print, is actually really, really hard. It just takes ages and ages.
Well, and especially if you're wanting to crop, if you're wanting to keep the original, the whole picture, but a lot of times, right, if you're wanting to zoom in on a particular feature, that's probably where it also becomes even more limiting.
Oh, it's really, really limiting. Yeah. And, and the photography has to be top notch. Like, it can't be, there can't be flares in the dark areas. I mean, so it really, really takes a long time. So finding all those, finding all those combinations in, when using public domain imagery, especially when you want to print it, which is really important to me to have the physical object. I mean, that actually takes a really substantial amount of time. So I mean, you know, I could sort of sift through public domain images for hours and hours and come across with like one, you know, and then I actually sort of download that and put it away, because I think, you know, it's kind of a rarity to find something, which is to the standard that that I'd like to work with.
Well, like, but here's why, and some of these I understand why you put in there. They're obviously, well, I say obviously, but you know, they almost appear to be either they're demonstrating something crazy, some sort of madness going on, or something from a fairy tale. But you also did some things that are just very straightforward, not at all tied to, like, for instance, for Quillis, the two at the very end, I'm assuming it's just some sort of noble that had a portrait done of himself.
Yeah, look, I mean, some of them are just kind of filler too. You know, some of them are just kind of really striking images that, you know, that have a particular kind of sensibility, but maybe just don't relate to anything in the book, because, and it could have just been a case, well, I just simply didn't find an image for that article that was right, you know, and I've got a bunch of things here, so I can sort of just stick that in there, and that will kind of fill the page, but actually look sort of quite good as well. So I mean, that sort of does happen. I mean, I think what I'd like to do with the Quillis, which I've done for issue 3, is I've actually commissioned some original art for that. So I commissioned a couple of artists so far. I commissioned Stefan Pogue to do two pages. I mean, he does a lot of work for Goodman Games, for for DCC and MCC, and I commissioned Andrew Walter to do some original work as well. And you know, he did all the illustrations for Nightland, and he's done a lot of work for, you know, Melsonia Arts Council. I mean, he actually did the cover for Troika, and he's an amazing artist. And you know, and both work in that kind of weird fantasy kind of style. And so I actually have commissioned some work for issue 3. So I think issue 3 is going to be probably like, say, you know, 40% original and, you know, 60% public domain, right? And as I move forward, I'd probably like to, have all original art commissioned for Quillis. And I think the reason why I didn't do it in the first place was I actually only started kind of doing like RPG stuff at the beginning of COVID, you know, and, you know, because I was housebound basically, you know, from sort of March 2020. And I think I just started using the public domain stuff because it was just easy to do, you know. I didn't really sort of, you know, I knew of a few artists sort of back then, but I didn't really know how to approach them. I didn't really know how to contact them. And it was just one of those things. It was just easy to do. So that's how it kind of started. It you know, it sort of meant that I could just basically have this zine without the financial outlay. You know, like I didn't actually have to, I mean, I didn't know what I was doing. And and it was just a case of, well, you know, do I really want to go and spend X amount of dollars to commission sort of 12 pages of art where I basically just don't know what I'm doing, you know?
But I will say, but I think though, what you were forced to do, it seems both disjointed, but I would say at least for the color ones, I think maybe because of the tones, it seemed also unified. So it kind of, I think, does create a sense of unbalance for the person going through it. Like, but it's not awkward. It seems to fit.
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a thread that runs through all the images. It's really hard to define what that is, but you know, but it's not just, you know, but I just didn't, you know, I don't think my image selection is just random. Like I didn't just randomly select, like you said before, like a really high res image of a unicorn done in a really contemporary style, and then, you know, another image of something else. I mean, you know, the images have to appeal to me on some kind of like emotional, psychological level in the first place for me to kind of download them from these public domain sites. So I think it's, I mean, I think there is a thread, but it's really hard to define what it is, you know, and sometimes I kind of think of, the thread as being like, you actually mentioned this kind of portrait of an aristocrat, I think just before. I mean, I kind of think, well, maybe he's like one of the NPCs in a Quillis, maybe he's just like a character or something like that, or a patron in a Quillis. And I mean, for me, there's some kind of unity, but it's really hard to define in words what that unity is. It's probably just like a tone or something that kind of runs through everything for me to want to use the image in the first place.
Well, the other one that struck me the most, and I think was in the middle of the second one, was it shows a traveler. The picture is basically, I'd say, almost is maybe solar plexus down. It's all you're seeing, and you're seeing what looks like some sort of weird boot with his toe sticking out.
And that's right. Yeah, I know that image. Yeah, that's a great image.
Yeah, that I don't understand why it works.
Well, I'll tell you what that image is, and I'll tell you the story behind that image. Is that that's actually a painting of Jesus Christ.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, and I actually just didn't want to use the entire image, because then it just sort of brings something into the zine that I don't really want to have in there. Like, I don't really want, I mean, it's a magnificent painting. I can't actually remember who painted the picture. It's kind of like a 17th or 18th century painting. I mean, it's just kind of gorgeous, but I didn't actually want to put a picture of Christ holding a staff with a holy symbol, because people would immediately recognize it as being a picture of Christ. So I mean, that's the reason why I cropped that, to be honest, because it was of just stunning resolution. It was just going to look great in print. I sort of modified the colors somewhat in Photoshop, and sort of did some sort of tricky things to sort of get the resolution to be even kind of, to get the image to sort of be, a bit more punchy. But that's the reason why that image is cropped. I mean, it's kind of arbitrary, really, but that's why I just put the feed in, because I love the colors, but I just didn't want to have a picture of Christ, because people would immediately identify it as being that, and it just would bring something into the zine that I just don't really want to have there.
Well, I think it does two things for me. One is I never would have cropped that way. Never, ever, ever. But I'm looking at it, it's like, that's perfect.
Yeah, well, look, it's just one of those things. Like, I just tend to go with my instincts when I use these public domain images, and it's really just a case of, yeah, look, I was just playing around with how to crop it, and I thought, well, that's kind of weird. It's just a character's feet, So I just put it in there because it does create kind of a sense of mystery, and it can be sort of a bit jarring as well, but that kind of adds to, I think that to me just kind of adds to the content,
It does. And I think the other thing too, and this is something I've never really, I understood on a conscious level, but never could actually be successful at it, is, at least for photography, when I was in it, it almost seems like cropping always improved a picture and almost never hurt it. I'm being generic or just being kind of flippant here, but it just seems like we're afraid of tight crops or odd crops. And when you see something done like this, it just goes to show that there's a lot more in an image than what you're seeing when you see the whole thing.
Yeah, there absolutely is. And I think what sort of cropping does, especially when you're using things like, say, public domain images, where you might actually have a lot to play with, it just creates particular pictorial tensions. And that can really sort of just amplify the image a lot. So I actually tend to do that with a lot of the images. I mean, there are a lot of crops, especially when I'm using things like color paintings. And that aspect of it is something that's really important to me. Just getting, just getting the right crop to kind of maximize some kind of effect, And so what I tend to do is when I download the images, and and if the resolution's what I want, I actually then spend quite a bit of time experimenting with tons of crops, and
Right.
or putting the image in the page layout and sort of just moving it around and just sitting with it for a while until I actually get you know, what I think will have the kind of effect that I'm sort of searching for.
Yeah, and I appreciate people doing that. I know myself, I tend to be much more haphazard about my approach, but you know, when you see, you know, I think the choices, especially the picture of Christ and also the picture of the noble, it just goes to show how a person who takes their time and properly selects images and creates, especially you know, with black and white, it sort of solves that. But you know, with the colors, it's like you kind of, I don't want to say we're forced into a palette, but you know, you were able to create a palette to kind of thread the whole book together.
Yeah, and it's just and what's enjoyable about using, you know, images like that is it's another kind of decision making process. You know, it's another sort of creative process of the zine. I mean, it's obviously very different when you commission art, because commissioning art is kind of very specific. You know, like you usually when you know, I mean, I've commissioned quite a bit of art now. You know, from different people, and that's very specific. You know, because you're actually giving the artist, you know, the reproduction size and you know, and I don't think artists would appreciate being cropped. You know, like I mean, I mean, if I commissioned a work and then kind of said, well, I'll just zoom into this kind of part of it, and just use, you know, the legs instead of, you know, the body that they've drawn. I mean, it's not really how sort of
No.
commissioning goes. So I think when you're actually playing with images that kind of technically like no one really owns, I suppose, which is why they're public domain, there's just a bit more latitude there to sort of do creative stuff with it, you know. So that, you know, but again too, I think the sort of public domain stuff, I think, you know, I'd probably look to kind of phasing that out as Quillis sort of moves forward, and hopefully it'll sort of get to a stage where it'll just be all original art, and you know, and I might even start. I mean, I'm even thinking about possibly, you know, commissioning sort of content for it as well in terms of writing. You know, from different people, where, you know, and you know, and maybe make it into this kind of weird fantasy kind of OSR zine. Like I don't know. I mean, they take, you know, each issue takes so long to do that I'm just taking it one step at a time. But I think the art thing is something that, you know, I would look forward to actually having just all original art by a number of artists in each issue. I mean, it would be.
Are you trying to do that more for, I guess, just not say more, but is one reason for doing it is to try and save time? I mean, because the amount of time you're taking to scour for public domain, is that part of it?
Not really. It's just I actually really enjoy working with artists. I mean, my sort of career in Australia was actually working with artists. That's what I did for a job. So I actually just really like the interactive process, and I really like what kind of artists bring to the table. I just really like how I just really like how I mean, an example is when I worked with, you know, when I worked with Andrew Walter on Nightland. I mean, I gave him some sort of briefs of what I wanted, and, you know, what he came back with just absolutely surpassed my expectations on every level. And I actually just enjoy that kind of process. I think, you know, it's not really time. It's just really, I actually just enjoy that sort of process of working, you know, collaboratively with an artist where what they do ultimately amplifies what you're doing. So it's really just, it's really more about that, actually. It's just really just another part of the process. You know, I've never commissioned writers before, so I'm not really sure how that would kind of work. And it's something that I'm interested in sort of trying. I mean, you know, but again, too, it's just I'm just trying to take it one step at a time. So what I might do for the fourth issue is I may actually commission, say, you know, a couple of people to come up with something, and just see how the writing process works, you know, with hiring someone who's, you know, external. So, but you know, but the art thing is just a facet that I really enjoy, actually, because I actually love looking at I actually love RPG art, and I love a specific kind of RPG, sort of role-playing game art. Like I love stuff that's kind of hand-drawn. I love line art, I love kind of weird, weird fantasy kind of art. So it's really just exploring that, really, with artists.
Well, I guess for myself, I was my current project I've been working on. I pulled up a generic map from a Dyson Logos map to kind of work from. It wasn't exactly what I wanted, but it kind of helped me partway through. And then I knew I just needed to get somebody to actually do a map. So I ended up hiring somebody to create a map. And then once they created the map, that provided more inspiration. It gave me something more solid, but I ended up writing more content based on the extra stuff they put in that map. So I guess with the art as well, do you find that when you get art back, do you go back and does it cause you to do any rewrites?
It did with Andrew Walter, because he actually came up with some fantastic ideas which he included in the work, which I didn't think of. So then I actually took a cue from that and kind of modified the writing to kind of to kind of echo the image. So that's a definite yes, and that's just something that's another reason why I enjoy working with artists as well, because because I sort of tend to give the artist fairly open sort of latitude in terms of what they come up with, and I'm really prepared to modify what I've written to then take maybe inspiration or ideas from what they've done. So that's something that's of enormous interest as well.
Yeah, I mean, the idea that art inspires art, if we want to call writing art, to me, that's been a subject I find always interesting, maybe even slightly emotional, just thinking about just how motivating something can be to cause other people to do things, and those people motivate and inspire people to do things as well. And sometimes those things come back full circle too, and maybe create something to inspire the person that originally started the whole thing as well.
Yeah, well I mean, I think when you're writing and when you commission art, I mean, to me there's a really nice feedback loop there. There's just there's this kind of circular thing that happens, and I'm working on a sequel to Nightland now, and and there are some ideas in there which have just been directly influenced by the art, which I sort of didn't really think of before. So to me, it's just to me, it's just really a case of, like you said, of just art can definitely inspire more art, and that's just I mean, that's one of the reasons going forward that I'd like to have all original art for for the zines.
Well, and it's also good for artists too, obviously. The other thing I noticed when I did the bestiary for Journey in the Badlands, Chema, who, I live in a very rural area and spent a lot of my time outdoors and had certain experiences. I wrote up these creatures kind of based on, creatures I also knew. Then his art, when it came back, didn't necessarily reflect what I was thinking it was. And it was great and wild. And I thought, that's a lot of fun. And I also was thinking too, it's like, even with art, with a bestiary, in times past, like illustrators would illustrate creatures from Africa without having seen them. They just go by the description. And I just thought, the bestiary, the description or the picture could both be, or either could be, unreliable narratives. You know what I mean? It's kind of interesting if you start looking at even incongruities between the art and the description. It's like, there could even be even taken from that, where it's just, we're all fallible in our interpretations, both as a writer, also both as an illustrator. And I thought, it's kind of a neat angle to take, or could take, with some of the stuff.
Yeah, definitely. And I think too with RPGs, I mean, I just think that art is really critical in games, or in sort of, you know, zines or whatever. And I think it's just a, you know, I think it's a case where, like you said, there's content and then there's work, and there's this kind of third entity that's kind of created when you actually look at the content and look at the image. I mean, there's just, there's just something there that's, that I think is kind of indispensable for what creates, I suppose, an atmosphere for games. And I mean, for me, when I got into gaming when I was very young, I was probably about 11 or 12, when I was growing up in Australia. I mean, what really attracted me to RPGs in the first place was the art. It was just, it was like, the covers, the covers of, I think the cover of the sort of basic box set with the Errol Otis cover. And
yeah, you're right. There, I mean, that is the first thing you see, and that's the hook into the brain, really.
Yeah, and that's kind of the segue, and I think, I think art's just something that, I mean, a cover for an RPG is really important, right? Like a cover for a zine is really important, and what really hooks you in is the artwork.
Well, it's like there's a crazy podcast called Punch Up the Jam, where they'll take a song and they'll kind of deconstruct it, and they'll talk about, try and make sense of the lyrics. It's tend to be humorous, but there's a song called Drops of Jupiter by This Train. And after listening to it, because they have sometimes the guy would buy these tracks where you could as multi-tracks, you can start dropping things out so you can just hear the vocals. And what makes, if you listen to various covers, which I enjoy listening to covers of songs, and they're usually lacking. And one thing they mentioned is there's an orchestra playing. There's stringed instruments playing behind the voice at key moments in Drops of Jupiter. And if you drop those strings out, it's not that great. I mean, so it's still a good song, but it's not a great song.
Right.
And I think art's kind of like that. I mean, there's something, you hear it, and when it syncs, it's like, it just feels, it gives a rightness. It transports when it's tied to the text as well. I think you kind of had to have both, but when they're in sync, you got the strings and you got the rock band, and you marry them together perfectly. It's a wonderful experience.
Oh, well, I completely agree. And there's kind of a magic there, and I think, I think gamers kind of know what that magic is, where there's a kind of perfect, there's a kind of synergy there, between the text and, the imagery. And, that's something that appeals to me enormously about games. I sort of find the art and, the imagery to be sort of kind of crucial, like,
Oh, yeah, and especially crucial to the GM as well. I mean, it's definitely meant to be inspiring.
Yeah, and I think it's kind of meant to sort of, trigger, meant to sort of trigger a GM's imagination, and, it's meant to be evocative, and, and I think it's just, I think it's just been a really crucial aspect of games now for kind of almost, 50 years, 40, 50 years.
Yeah, and I think, going back to, in a way you can kind of even describe, modes of play, like you could probably just show a picture and to represent the, we'll just say, the style of D&D you like to play. Like, for instance, for me, some people could pull up a Larry Elmore picture, say, this is a D&D I want. Me, the D&D I want's Earl Otis. For you, it may be, a surreal painting. It's just, it definitely, I think, identifies the direction and tone in a way.
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. I mean, if you look at things like 5e, if you look at that kind of artwork, that, that's not, I mean, that's a particular kind of fantasy, you know, and I agree that, you know, Larry Elmore's very particular. I mean, the stuff that I really like is things like, I mean, I really love the artwork in the first Monster Manual, you know, by TSR. I mean, I actually love that kind of, work, which almost looks kind of slightly amateurish, you know, which almost looks like an artist that really loves what they're doing and they're pushing their abilities to the very, you know, to their very limits, you know, but it's not quite sort of right. You know, there's just something kind of, I wouldn't say wrong about it, but it's not kind of professional, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
You know,
and there seems to be a wide variation in the art too. You're right, because some of them really do and others don't. And I'm thinking, I can't remember, it wasn't the succubus in the Monster Man, but was it in the Dungeon Master's Guide?
right,
Almost had like a classical vibe to it, where others just look like, yeah, I'm just sketching stuff out or drawing a cartoon, like in the Dungeon Master's Guide. It's just, but you're right. There's something magical about it, and I don't think anything's been able to replicate it. I don't know if it's just from nostalgia from our point of view, or if it's the design aesthetic that has pretty much gone away with the whatever typesetting they were doing back in the 70s.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think the typesetting back in the 70s, I mean, from what I've read, you know, the typesetting was actually done at the printers. You know, the printers actually did the typesetting back then. You know, you would actually take in the manuscript and that actually all typeset. I do think that TSR had one of the first word process. I think they had, you know, they bought a word processor where they did their own typesetting, I think in the early 80s. And from what I've read, it's really expensive. But just on another thing, you know, just about, you know, what's really amazing about that kind of art is I was at GaryCon in 2019, and I went to this fantastic sort of artist panel where there were, you know, I think there were about 8 artists who were all early TSR artists, you know, including Errol Otis, and I think Larry Elmore was on the panel. I think Darlene was on the panel. There was a bunch of other people whose names slipped my mind. But what was really amazing about that is that a lot of those artists were kind of like 18 to 20, you know, when they were doing all that kind of stuff. And you know, and that kind of just really blew my mind, you know. I mean, it really blew my mind. And there, you know, there was one artist on the panel whose name I can't recall, and he was just someone that kind of lived in Lake Geneva, you know, and he still lives in Lake Geneva now. And you know, he'd kind of just, you know, I mean, you know, I'm not sure how he came across TSR, but he was like literally like 18 when he was doing some of that work, you know. And I think to what you mentioned before about sort of that, you know, that kind of work, I'm not sure if that's what a lot of sort of people that buy, you know, RPGs, you know, especially the ones that dominate in orders of magnitude, the other, you know, other kinds of, say, RPGs, like, you know, say Wizards of the Coast, for example. Like, I just don't know what the audience for that kind of work is like at the moment. You know, I think it's definitely there in this kind of OSR realm, but I just kind of think that in this kind of wider realm, you know, this much kind of wider market for, I just don't think that there's much of an audience for that kind of work. I mean, to me, I love it, and I actually love looking at it. I love reading the history behind it. I love, I just love everything about it. But I just think a lot of sort of gamers have maybe outgrown that kind of stuff. I mean, people like me still really like it because I grew up with that, you know. So there's a kind of sense of nostalgia there for it. But you know, I just think that I'm not sure what this, you know, I'm just not sure what this kind of artwork would look like, say, to a 24-year-old gamer, if that makes sense.
Oh, it does. And you're right. I mean, it's right. The budget's being spent on art, the expectations, the layout. And I think that's definitely demonstrated I think that's the zine community has demonstrated that there may not be as large of an audience, but there are still enough people interested in it. But you're right. it's not gonna, if you're going to sell something on DM's Guild, you're going to have to make sure your trade dress is maybe not exactly as D&D, but 5e, but or TSRs or Wizard of the Coast, whatever they're called. But you're going to want to, but you're going to have to produce something that looks very similar in order for people to be willing to buy it.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I've looked at DM's Guild. I mean, not to publish anything there, but just out of interest. And I was really just amazed. I mean, you can actually get things. I mean, you can actually download so much stuff for free. You can download page backgrounds that have this kind of distress look. You know, you can download borders. You can download sort of these really slick images of monsters and sort of, you know, player characters and all this classes and all this kind of stuff. And I was really sort of amazed at how kind of generic it all felt, you know, that you know, that you're right. There is a particular kind of look. So if you want to kind of get the eyeballs onto your product, I mean, you have to kind of be, you know, you have to sort of make, you know, I suppose the things have to have a sort of visual kind of sensibility, you know, that people that, you know, to attract people that already play that kind of thing. But look, I think the same can be said for, say, OSR zines, for example. I mean, they have a particular kind of, you know, feel and look to them. And I think that sort of feel is like, I mean, I think a lot of zines have that feel of like the auteur, right? Where it's one person doing everything, right?
Yeah.
Or it's one person doing a lot of things. And I just kind of think that, say, if you wanted to appeal to, say, I mean, if you were doing, you know, if you called what you were doing, say, OSR zines, and you made a zine that looked like something that came from Wizards of the Coast, you know, that was small, that was printed on glossy paper, that had a, you know, a digitally painted cover, I don't think it would appeal to, say, you know, I don't think it would appeal to OSR audiences at all, right?
No, right.
At all.
I think the difference is, for people buying 5e, this not be disparaging at all, and I'm just going to make broad generalizations.
No, not at all.
But I think they're looking for something similar. People that are interested in zines are looking for things that are different.
I'd sort of agree with that. Yeah, I'd completely agree with that. And that's where I think, I think zines have, I think zines in the OSR especially have become a kind of art form in their own right. And I just kind of say that because every kind of zine you look at is completely different. You know, it's, it is approached from a different angle in terms of just, visually, in terms of layout, in terms of the look. Whereas, the WotC stuff, especially on something like DM's Guild, it is kind of, a lot of that stuff is just indistinguishable from every other product, and that's not to say bad things about it, because like, good luck to their success, but it's just, but I suppose it's just what audiences are looking for.
Well, and I think the thing is, right, and people, I think the positive thing, at least, is probably as far as the this, what was called, was a designer guide or whatever for D&D. There's a certain, even though I think their content that they put out for their modules is disjointed and a mess, but I think they do want things done in a particular order. And I think people who go to the books, every book is, as far as I think their main books and their adventures, there's an organization that's similar, and you can go to any, and if people follow that same guide, any book that you look through you can follow along the same way, for good or for ill. Where you get other stuff like Morkborg or Mothership, or it could be a Quillis. They all present information in different ways.
Yeah, and I think that's kind of where this idea of the zine as an art form sort of comes in. It's just it's all a very sort of personal approach, and I think people want to take a personal approach, and I think that's kind of the key thing, where I think zines in the OSR have become an artistic expression now. Like I mean, you mentioned Morkborg. I mean, that's an amazing kind of design, right? I mean that's the layout in that is just really incredible. But it's not an approach I would take. But I see sort of people taking that approach a lot now, especially when they make stuff for Morkborg. I actually have a lot of third-party Morkborg stuff, and it's really amazing how many designers sort of take that sort of approach. Where they actually use like 100 typefaces. They have the sort of the hot pinks and the acidic yellows, or all over their books, and they have all that sort of the wobbly text. It's all at kind of different angles and all this kind of stuff. And I kind of think, well, it's like, I mean, that's created a kind of a particular kind of style, but I kind of think, well, you could probably, approach that without it looking like that,
Yeah, you're right, because I think, I think there's a couple of things. It'd be interesting to know how we'll look back 10 years, to that aesthetic. But I think the other thing is those people, I do not own Morkborg, the book, but I think, they're breaking rules because they know how to break rules. The problem is people who are not on the cutting edge of layout design, you start breaking rules, it may not turn out like you think. You may think it looks kind of like it, you think you're doing and things are disjointed, but there's a logic behind people that are experts laying that stuff out, and then people who aren't. And I think you can run into trouble trying to ape somebody that you really may not have quite the chops to do.
Yeah, I mean, you're probably right about that, but still, I'm sort of glad it's all kind of happening, because it kind of feels like, I think the scene just feels very kind of fruitful at the moment. It feels very abundant. I mean, there's just tons and tons of stuff, and I really think that there's just an incredible amount of creativity. So I sort of welcome it all, to be honest.
Oh, I agree. And I think, and people like say Phil Reed, he's not aping them per se, but he's saying, you know what, this is the sensibility. This is my take on the sensibility. And I'm not, the stuff he's doing, there's I won't say conservative, but he's still very conservative in some approaches, but also being very experimental in others, without just being, I'm just going to do a bunch of typefaces and I'm going to change the sizes, randomly. If you, that's the type of stuff I'm thinking you better make sure you know what you're doing.
Yeah, well, I mean, something like that takes an incredible amount of time. And I think with Phil Reed, I mean, he's definitely got the kind of skill set for say the layout, but he makes so much content, I mean, he produces so much stuff, which is kind of incredible I mean, I found it from my experience of, say, doing a Quillis 2, which is, a lot more, and especially Nightland, which is a lot more detailed in the layout and the typography. I mean, I'm spending sort of, 3 times as much, 3 times more on the actual layout than the writing. Because you can endlessly detail this kind of stuff. So I think to have, when you said like the kind of, you have to have the chops, to kind of do this stuff. I mean, when you start getting into the granularity of layout programs, and you sort of get really deep into sort of how to get nuance and how to tweak things, and how to sort of activate a page. I mean, it just takes an incredibly long time, right? So for someone like Phil Reed, I mean, because he's kind of a one-person show, kind of doing everything, much to his credit, it's just a case of productivity, like, I mean, I'm sure he could sort of start including a lot of bells and whistles in his design if he wanted to, but that would probably take away from the writing time.
Yeah, and he stated he wanted his to be readable by himself. So he kind of was also looking at too, as far as utility, where some of the stuff you start losing utility if you're going too far, and that's fine. I guess that's what you're wanting.
Yeah, yeah, I mean, that's what I feel about Morkborg. It's just, to me, the layouts are really fantastic, and there's so many kind of great ideas in the community that produces stuff for it, which tends to emulate sort of the main sort of core book or the main designer's kind of sort of aesthetic. But the thing about Morkborg and all the kind of third-party stuff produced for it is it's really hard to work out kind of what the information is on a page and how to use it, because it's kind of a cacophony. It's so kind of some of it's so kind of maximalist in its design. It's just really hard to kind of read it,
Right.
Like it's really like it's really difficult to kind of like. I have a bunch of stuff, and it's really hard to work out how to run an adventure in Mork Borg. Like it's really, really difficult. I mean, it's not something you can kind of do on the fly,
Right. It's a different, I guess the opposite in the spectrum is old school essentials.
Well, that's right. I mean, that's just something like, you could probably get any of those sort of official modules and you could sort of run them just kind of immediately, or actually just read them, say, the night before, just to familiarize yourself with it. And the next day you're kind of ready. But I sort of feel that, the Mork Borg aesthetic is just very different, and the kind of information design around that is kind of, I think it's just very, very complicated. I mean, I think Mothership, if you look at Mothership, for example, I think that has, the community around Mothership who produces third-party material for that, I think they probably have a much better sense of information design than the Mork Borg community. Like Mothership is very sort of clear, and the Mothership stuff, even though the design is really sort of considered, and the layout's really considered. I mean, Mothership is kind of like a lot of the stuff that's written for that is kind of written like an instruction manual. Like it's very clear, it's very minimal. It's almost like sort of an instruction document. So I think that those adventures are kind of more, just have a bit easier utility. But Mothership's an interesting sort of product as well, because that too has spawned off its own kind of look, so the people that sort of make stuff for Mothership, you'll see that there's kind of a particular design sensibility that they all kind of have,
Yes. And I think it's kind of interesting. I'm not really sure how this relates like 10 years or 15 years ago, but it does seem like we are seeing these occasional breakout games that are largely influencing other people in creators in big ways on the independent scene. So I don't know if one being Powered by the Apocalypse probably being the biggest, but we're still seeing things coming up and then creating, changes in the I don't say in the RPG scene, but there are definitely large influencers that are still coming up and influencing future designs.
Yeah, and I think to me, sort of, the two are the ones that we've just mentioned. I think Mork Borg and Mothership are kind of the ones at the top of the list right now. In terms of these kinds of breakthrough games that have really spawned a big following. I think Mork Borg has something like 700 third-party products now.
Are you serious?
Yeah, it has about 700, but they range from sort of 1- and 2-page pamphlet games that you find on itch.io to things that are more obviously more substantial. So there's a real variance in what's out there, but Mothership too. Look at how well the Kickstarter did.
Oh yeah,
right, and look at how well that recent book did, Hull Breach. That's just like a compilation book of various sort of third-party Mothership authors all compiled into this 200-page book, and all the Kickstarters do well. And I think what Mothership did incredibly well is that when you kind of think about it, right, in the history of sort of sci-fi, in the history of role-playing games, there's never really been a breakout sort of sci-fi game, but you could sort of say Traveller is like the sci-fi game, but I think what sort of Mothership captured was D&D in space, right? They kind of captured like dungeons in space, basically, which Traveller didn't really sort of quite do. I mean, Traveller is a very particular kind of sci-fi game, and I think there was obviously a big opening for for the themes that come up in Mothership, which the OSR didn't kind of do before, and that was kind of such an obvious kind of niche for such a long time. Especially in this kind of rules minimal kind of style, that the resonance that it's had is just so deep at the moment. I mean, if you look at the third party stuff, products on that come up on Kickstarter for Mothership, I mean, they all do tremendously well, and there's obviously like a real hunger for that kind of genre.
Well, I think what they've done, and I shouldn't speak because I haven't read a whole lot, and I thought about getting Hullbridge, but I didn't. But I think what they did is capture in a simple way the space is a terrible place, things are a hardship. I think they captured hardship and also presented space horror in a better way than any other game has.
Yeah, absolutely, and they also have like these key mechanics in the game that sort of that kind of set the tone. They have that kind of, I'm not too familiar with the rules, but they have the kind of panic mechanic and stuff like that. I mean it's really hard, for example, it's always been really difficult, I think, for say. Like if you look at the BX rules, right, to translate them into a sci-fi, to translate them into, say, science fiction, like it kind of just doesn't make sense. But I think what Mothership did is that they definitely captured what you mentioned, but they also have these really sort of clever mechanics that kind of amplify that as well.
Yeah, and it's probably true. I do have the PDF. I kind of flipped through it, but I was actually looking at getting Hullbreach really for Coriolis, because Coriolis on the 10 does talk about it. It's supposed to be like a horror level. It could be even cosmic level if you want, or you dial up and down, but it doesn't really present a very good way of presenting these types of situations and doing these types of adventures. Sure, you can say, oh, there's these monoliths, but nobody really has done a good job explaining or have an adventure going through a monolith and experiencing like an alien movie. I mean, that kind of feel, where there's tension, at least as far as I would say on the horror side of things. And that's where I think they've tapped in very well, where other games maybe kind of talk about it, but never provided any clear examples or tools to really effectively do it in one's home game.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right, and I think what's kind of interesting too about Mothership is that I listened to a podcast interview with one of the writers, one of the creators behind Mothership, which is Sean McCoy, and he said something really interesting. He sort of said that one of the one of the prime sort of objectives with one of the key areas for Mothership was actually building a community around the game. He said that's the most important thing. So I think when you actually have, like, I'm not familiar with Coriolis. Is that a Free League publishing game?
It is.
It is, right. I think I've seen it around. I'm not really familiar with it, but I think that what's kind of interesting about sort of these really successful sort of games now that say with Mothership is that there are so many kind of there's such a kind of deep community around Mothership that I think a lot of people are bringing different things to the game as well, and so I think that that's another thing where Mothership touches upon this the alien influence and the sort of the Event Horizon influence and all this kind of thing, but but I think that the third party stuff is really critical in that too, and I think people have brought all kinds of ideas that have sort of taken that sort of core sort of tenet and kind of really expanded it out.
Yeah, like I think it's called Pound of Flesh, which is about a space station.
Oh, that's great. That's really terrific.
Yeah, the problem is the presentation is fun to look at, but it's going to take it take me quite a bit of time to actually parse through the whole thing. But to me, that's a good example of a very gritty feel. I mean, without having to necessarily be horror, but it does feel like things aren't polished and clean. Things are just ugly and nasty. And it's living in space is a hard place. And I think they do a good job in that. But you're right. They also have even Joel Hines's Desert Moon of Karth, which I want to run sometime. Kind of takes it to another.
That's really great. That's really terrific.
But he takes it in a different direction.
It's like a Western in space.
Yes.
Yeah. It's like a science fiction Western, you know? And, you know, and that's the other thing. I mean, I think that, you know, that was obviously such a gap in the OSR, the sci-fi thing. And I think that, you know, what's interesting about sci-fi too, is it does allow for, you know, it does allow for a lot of genre fusion as well. You know, so you are seeing things like, you know, like Joel Hines's, you know, the idea of fusing, say, science fiction with, you know, with Westerns kind of stuff and bringing something to that. So I think it's all kind of great for gaming though. Like it's definitely interesting. I do think about, you know, what you touched on before. I do think about longevity of these games, because I sort of took a big hiatus from games and really got back into it in 2013 after taking like 20 years off. And I got into it by sort of DCC, right? You know, which is still around and still kind of thriving. And I sort of wonder, you know, because I have had these sort of conversations before about, you know, things like Mork Borg, where people say, oh, you know, I wonder if it's going to be around in 10 years' time. And I mean, what are your thoughts on these kinds of breakthrough success games that seem unbelievably popular at the moment?
Well, it could just be that it's just like fashion trends.
Right.
You're in the 80s, then you're out of the 80s, or maybe in the 90s, and you look at 90s fashion, you're like, well, that is just gaudy. And then later on it becomes nostalgia, then all of a sudden it's accepted again. So I don't know. I think regardless of if it fully sticks, I think it still influences and in ways that we probably don't always see. So I think even if Mork Borg becomes something that looks tacky 5 years from now, I think it will still have push boundaries that will affect the design of layout in the future in ways that aren't obvious.
Yeah, I think you're probably right about that. I mean, it's definitely, I think what these games, I think what games like Mork Borg have done, you know, is they've really upped the ante on layout for sure. You know what I mean? Like, I have a bunch of stuff, you know, I have a bunch of OSR stuff going back to say 2010, you know, to say 2013, you know, or 2015, for example. And kind of like, you know, when you look at things like presentation and layout, you know, you could probably say that people that were probably doing like the best presentation and layout was probably Lamentations of the Flame Princess. Right, they were doing really high quality sort of, you know, actually employing designers and stuff like that, and you know, and they had a reputation of being the best sort of books, right? You know, in terms of say the physicality, you know, especially in the OSR. But I think something like Mork Borg is now taking it to a different level, right? And when you look at stuff, say, on Kickstarters, you know, when you look at Kickstarter stuff that does really well, I mean, most of the things that do really well have great layout. Not to say it's directly influenced by Mork Borg, but I think Mork Borg is just really upped, saying that, you know, the information is, you know, is really important. The content's really important. But how you actually present that is really important as well, you know, and the page aesthetic, you know, is really important as well. And I think that that's what Mork Borg has done. You know, it's really kind of, everyone's kind of lifted their game because of it, either directly or indirectly, because they just realized that, you know, that you know, you can have great content, but you kind of need a frame around it, right? and there's probably, look, there are obviously exceptions to the rule. There's obviously some authors that it really doesn't matter maybe what the presentation's like, because the content, you know, the content is so good, but, you know, but they're the exceptions to the rule. You know, you know, where
I think, yeah, even if, yeah, I still think you can't get away from being successful in having solid layout. I don't think there's a way of doing that. You can still, I think you can still have a market and not have it, but I don't think you can enjoy a large level of success without it.
Yeah, and also too, you know, I think what the OSR done, you know, has done as well now is that, you know, that people actually want to own physical products again. They actually want to own the physical book, you know, because the people designing it are sort of, you know, there's considerations of, you know, they make, you know, size and paper stock and cover stocks and all this kinds of stuff. So I think it's really important now because, because I think a lot of things, especially in the OSR, are sort of looked on, you know, as artifacts.
Yeah.
You know, and that's a really important thing. I mean, an interesting story about layout, and this is something that sort of, you know, relates to something about sort of, you know, I talked at the beginning of our conversation about this kind of blockages that I was having about not being able to translate, you know, not being able to put stuff onto a page and just having all these ideas. Is that the, you know, the real breakthrough moment for me in terms of like layout was actually reading an interview with Kevin Crawford, you know, who did Stars Without Number and Worlds Without Number. And I think he actually said in the interview that he actually writes everything in the layout.
Oh, really?
Yeah. And that's, you know, that's what I do as well. I basically make all the sort of typographic decisions first, design the page, and actually write everything in the layout. So I actually know exactly how much space I have to work with. I know how many words I have to trim, you know, if I'm working in one column or two, you know, I'm trying to sort of keep everything to this kind of, you know, really usable state where everything, you know, is on a page or in a column or on a 2-page spread. And that's, you know, that's what layout has done for my work. And you know, that's why sorry.
Yeah, I'm going to make a guess here because I think there's two different branches that do the same thing. So Phil Reed he has a layout that he has in mind. He puts out first because to him, it's the visual more than just the content. Yeah. I'm going to wager that Kevin Crawford is a machine, and he's a machine. He's doing it for efficiency. That's all he's doing it for. It has nothing to do with anything else. And then, okay, I got this many words and I'm going to keep writing until I get that many words. Next page, I'm going to keep writing until I get this many words.
Yeah. Well, I mean, he's definitely a machine. I mean, it's kind of, again, too, I simply can't wrap my head around how much that guy makes, you know? Like, I mean, I actually got World Without Number recently. I'm just kind of staggered. I'm just staggered at the level of content. And, you know, and he's not just producing that. I mean, he's producing kind of supplements for these books. You know, he's producing kind of, you know, the odd adventure here and there. And, you know, that's, you know, Kevin Crawford is a unique case. But having said that, it's, you know, that was a real breakthrough moment. I mean, Gavin Norman writes his books like that as well.
Yeah,
you know,
but Kevin Crawford's still, I think, I think he just plugs in and it just tick, 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 tick.
Yeah, I mean,
8 hours straight.
Yeah, I mean, again, too, it's just one of these things. I think, God, how do you do that? I mean, it's kind of incredible. But you know, but you know, it's but yeah, I mean, you know, for me, the layout is you know, probably the most critical part of my books because it just kind of sets parameters for me. You know, it sets boundaries, and I kind of need boundaries, you know, and if the boundaries like a font size and, you know, and it's a page size and it's columns or whatever, I mean, I sort of need as many boundaries as possible because if it's too open-ended, I just simply can't do anything.
Oh, I'm the opposite. I just,
Yeah,
I just keep writing to the point where it's absurd. Now I'm like in trouble.
See, I just can't do that. You know, it's kind of like if I just have a page, you know, like if I just have like a Google Docs open and, you know, and I'm told to just write, I just simply can't do anything. But, but once I have, say, a layout and I have some typefaces on there, which kind of might influence the writing because, you know, the typefaces might have a particular kind of flavor as well. Like, you know, like Mork Borg, there's a particular flavor to the typefaces. You know, these kinds of distressed Gothic typefaces and these like, you know, these kinds of, you know, mono typefaces and things like that creates a particular, you know, palette. I kind of need that because, you know, if I don't have the boundaries, I just simply can't do anything. I mean, I simply can't write. And that was actually what my problem was when I was just writing like hundreds and hundreds of pages of notes, which were just kind of going on, you know, there were no boundaries there, you know, so without the boundaries and the parameters, like it was just very hard to be creative.
So these notes, are they in electronic format or are they handwritten?
No, they're actually electronic, but I've actually started making handwritten notes now in sort of like just a little kind of notebook. And I actually find that there's something that when you do something by hand, especially, you know, in the way that I work, which is just writing extensive bullet pointed notes. I mean, it's not long form writing. It's just kind of, it's bullet points no longer than a tweet, right? And I sort of find that I feel a bit more productive and creative actually now in the last sort of 6 months writing notes by hand than I do writing stuff on a computer on an iPhone.
Well, I think for all of us, because I don't consider myself much of a writer, I'm just very inefficient, but I think we all have to kind of find whatever, we have to play the game that gets our mind to trigger. And sometimes it's hard to figure out what exactly those elements are.
That's right. And, you know, it took me a long time. It took me like sort of 6 or 7 years, you know, or of actually kind of writing gaming ideas before it actually went because I sort of just had to figure out how to do it. And I just had to put all that time into it beforehand. And, you know, and it does take a long time and you really have to figure out what your triggers are in terms of what's going to kind of unlock your creativity and your productivity and what kind of system, you know, you kind of create for yourself to do that, you know. And I think that just takes for me, it just took an incredibly long amount of time. It was very frustrating, you know, because I sort of felt like I really wanted to do something, you know, with writing, but it's just very difficult to figure out procedurally how to go about doing it. You know, it's just very difficult. But, you know, in hindsight, I look at it now and I think, well, it's just the time that it took, you know. But there's definitely it was definitely a long haul. It felt like a long haul for me. I mean, now I feel productive, but for years I kind of felt like I was kind of just meandering, you know.
Yeah, and likewise. And I also think too, what I've noticed is I've been doing some different things. It's I think some things I think are, you know, I need just to generate some seeds, and the other ones I just need to kind of just write to figure out. And it seems like with different kinds of projects, there's a different kind of thing I need to do to make it work. But
yeah, definitely. And you know, sometimes I feel you just need a starting point. I mean, I found that when I wrote this adventure called Xanadu. Which is
let's dig that one out. Yes, because I was wanting to talk about that, and we got to rambling. So let's just let's talk about Xanadu, because I'm just going to explain. This is the most 8-bit, or maybe it's fewer bits than that. Maybe it's 4-bit. I don't know. It's like artwork style dungeon.
Well, I mean, a lot of that stuff was kind of taken from images online, which I modified in Photoshop, you know, and again, too, it was just, I wanted to bring like a unique kind of aesthetic to it.
Well, no,
and
you did that.
you know, because I hadn't kind of seen that before, and a lot of it came from sort of 8-bit sort of images of like video game screenshots, which I took and then sort of like changed, you know, which I really modified and put in there. But again, too, it was just a case of, I think I wrote that in the middle of the lockdown, right? I think I wrote it in like, I can't remember when I wrote it. It would have been towards the end of 2020, but that was when the city was actually just completely shut down. I mean, you know, there wasn't a soul on the street. And it was just another case of I just wasn't ready to sort of commission art. I just wanted to get it out, and it just kind of seemed like, and at the time I was researching the history of video games really extensively, like, you know, video games of the 70s and the 80s, and I was looking at all these kind of fantasy games that were done for, you know, like home computers, you know, in the 80s, and I thought, wow, it's kind of like, you know, the visuals are really cool on that, you know, the you know, it's very sort of classic, you know, it felt like it echoed what was happening in the 70s, right, with all that kind of TSR artwork, but you know, but obviously like using like the technology of the time, and it was just kind of very random, you know, the whole thing was just kind of, it just felt like the right thing to do at the time. I mean, it's something I'd like to kind of follow up, you know, and maybe commission an artist who works in that kind of, in a pixelated style, to do something like that. But there's kind of an interesting story about Xanadu too, in that, you know, we were talking about triggers and how sort of how creativity happens. And what was kind of interesting about Xanadu is that I actually downloaded the map from Dyson Logos's site, you know, the cartographer. And it was one of those kinds of maps that he sort of generously releases for commercial use. You know, I mean, he has a section on his website where he says you can download this for free, and, you know, it just needs attribution and stuff. So I downloaded the map, and I kind of just had absolutely no idea what I was going to do with it. But then I sort of worked backwards in that, in the sense that I just kind of was, I just sort of randomly populated all the rooms with kind of stuff that I thought was cool. And then it was only at the very end that I sort of was able to work out how to tie it all together. So, and it's kind of how I tend to write. Like, and another example is I'm working on this sort of adventure now, which is which is a fantasy adventure based on a crashed spaceship, right? And, you know, it's kind of like indebted to things like Expedition to the Barrier Peaks. And I commissioned an artist to make a map, to make like a 50-room kind of mega dungeon map of this kind of spaceship. You know, Andrew Walter actually did the map, you know, who did the work on Nightland. But I had no idea what I was going to do with the map. You know, it's just the map. So how I like to work is I like to kind of just basically have, in this case, the parameter and the restrictions of the map, and then kind of figure out what's going to be in the rooms, and then finally figure out what the relationship is between all the elements in the room. And that's another thing that took me a really long time to work out, because when I was trying to write adventures before Xanadu, I was trying to write them sort of kind of forward instead of backwards. You know, I tried to work out what the idea was, what the dungeon would look like, you know, who the antagonists were, you know, all this kind of stuff. And it just never worked for me. Whereas, you know, when I actually have something, you know, that's kind of concrete and say, well, here are the restrictions, I find that it makes me a lot more creative in having that, as opposed to doing it the way I assume most writers would do it.
Well, I found, like, going back to Kevin Crawford, I found that generating seeds from his various tables is actually huge to actually writing things up. So I agree that creating some sort of constraint, intellectual creative constraint, is actually more liberating and can be more evocative than it can be anything.
Yeah, well, I mean, those tables are absolutely incredible. I mean, they're some of the most kind of interesting random tables that have been written for a long, long time. And I think that they've been, you know, really highly influential on a lot of people. I mean, I know that, you know, Yun Suan is really indebted to Kevin Crawford. You know, that setting, and yeah, I completely agree. And actually, a lot of the tables that I've written for Quillis, especially in issue 3, are really indebted to Kevin Crawford's tables, where, you know, you have like 3 columns of these really kind of random things, and you're supposed to kind of technically like roll in all 3 columns, you know, D20 on 3 columns, and sort of combine them all. So it kind of means that there's just kind of thousands of possible combinations, but you know, but they are amazing. And these kinds of seeds and the way he does them, you know, I think he's kind of the master of that kind of stuff.
It's interesting.
I mean, he's the master. I mean, those tables and stars without number, and, you know, especially are just fantastic.
Yeah, because I use other dust for in Journey of the Madlands for the enclaves and giving prompts. But yeah, if you listen to an interview, he's like, he doesn't see that he's doing anything. He's not creating anything that's not already out there. He doesn't see I guess he doesn't understand why other people aren't doing this, but I don't think he understands other people just are not wired to disseminate the genres and distill it down to what he has in the way that he does.
Yeah, and you know his tables are really great for, you know, I mean, if you're interested in the type of, you know, in a type of gameplay which is like domain play, you know, where you're actually dealing with really big worlds, and you're dealing with you know, intrigue and politics, and, you know, factions, and, you know, all, you know, rich detailed world building. I mean his tables are just kind of, I mean, they're just kind of unsurpassable. I mean to me they're kind of like the blueprint of how to do that. Well, you know, in terms of random generations,
right? But I think what he's done that nobody else has done is he's taken, like, let's say Stars Without Number. He's taken, like, I don't want to exaggerate, but he takes all the tropes, figures out all the tropes, and then kind of throws them all on the tables, so that when you do roll, you're getting a mixture of different tropes.
No, you're absolutely right about that. Yeah, you're absolutely right. And I like too how there's, you know, and in that sense, you know, it kind of makes the setting like a lot more implied than set.
Yes.
You know, and it makes the setting like non-canonical. And that's another thing that I really find interesting. I mean, I'm actually about to start a Worlds Without Number sort of campaign. I'm playing in it, so I'm interested in looking forward to how that goes. But that's the interesting thing about you know, his kind of process. You know, that it's this kind of implied setting, and, you know, like you said, all the tropes are there, and it's something that, look, I've never played Stars Without Number, but I've sort of really been influenced by a ton of ideas in there. And I think that, you know, his books to me are really useful for that, you know, that they just, you know, and they've certainly influenced me in how I think about random tables, for sure.
So like the original Traveler, I mean, that's really, you know, I won't say, I guess, you know, Traveler had those generations where they didn't really have it for D&D. You could randomly generate certain things as far as the first edition, but I think Traveler was the one that actually you would randomly determine locations, but they were, I think, in ways left a little too general to really be able to do much with it, where with Worlds Without Number, the adding of the tags created.
The tags are great.
Yeah, that's where the juice is.
Yeah, it was kind of really interesting about Traveler, because again, too, this is another 2019 GaryCon story. I was kind of lucky enough to go to this kind of small kind of group. You know, it's like 6 of us, and we spoke with Mark Miller for about 2 hours, who designed Traveler. And you know, it was in one of the little kind of apartments which are at the I forget the name of the location that GaryCon takes place, but it was in one of the apartments there. And we all sat down on the lounge and asked him all these sort of questions. And it was kind of really interesting because, he said that when Traveller came out, the setting was very kind of implied. It was kind of meant to be a generic sci-fi setting. There were the tables in there. And what was kind of really interesting is that Mark Miller thought that people didn't want adventures. He kind of thought that people would actually write their own adventures, right? Once they had the rules, which of course they didn't do. But the other thing that sort of how Traveller ended up sort of developing, with all these kinds of extra sort of books that came out aside from the original 3 in the box, is that people actually wanted canon. They actually wanted a world, and they wanted a history to the world. And I actually found that really kind of fascinating. I think Traveller would work. I mean, Traveller would probably work today as an OSR game, right? Because it's just this kind of implied setting with these basic kinds of tools. But back then, I found it really fascinating how, how people wanted the canon, they wanted the lore, they wanted the history, they wanted the events, and that's what they ended up doing. That's what Mark Miller ended up doing. He ended up sort of creating the universe and the history and the sectors and all this kind of stuff because it was just something that that was kind of the demand from the players.
But even TSR, I mean, Gary Gygax, he didn't see any value in adventures or setting. I mean, really, it took him a while to all of a sudden it's like, then other people were making money off it. And he's like, was it like Judges Guild or whatever?
Judges Guild, yeah, Judges Guild.
First, like, yeah, go ahead. Nobody's gonna be buying those. Yeah, sure, I'll make a little money, no problem. All of a sudden they're making bank, and he's
But when you actually look at, I think some of the greatest kind of random tables ever made, like in terms of the history of the hobby. I mean, some of the greatest random tables are by Judges Guild, right? They're in things like the Wilderlands of High Fantasy series, the City State. I forget what it's called, the City State of the Emperor, or whatever. I mean, the random tables in that are just absolutely amazing because they are things like, say, generating like a location or a village or ruins or something, and there's kind of like 20 random tables on one page, and it's all like 5-point font, and it's to kind of generate this kind of location, and I think that I don't know if they were the inventors of that, but that's kind of I mean that part of the history of the hobby and what they did, in terms of random generation,
Right. It's easy for us to look back and make some assumptions or wonder why, people were so blind to things. But at the time, nothing was obvious. This was all so new.
Yeah, and people kind of didn't know what they were doing, and they were just kind of figuring it out.
Yeah. Speaking of random tables, Xanadu, I see a Jim Ward table here. You started a circle, and your roll. Was it a 10-sider?
I think you roll a D10, and that was actually, I think that was kind of inspired by, I think it was either inspired by something in Gamma World or in Metamorphosis Alpha.
Yeah, it's Jim Ward. I looked at that, I'm like, oh my goodness. I look back and hate those tables. It's like, oh, he presented in a very beautiful way. And it might be fun.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of interesting. I mean, most of the feedback that I got about that is that most people hated it. I mean, most people actually absolutely hated that table. Like, like all the feedback that I personally did it because I just wanted to redesign it in kind of a nicer way, and I thought that those tables were kind of just cool, in terms of working out how to work out a weapon, instead of just doing an intelligence check or whatever. Just actually having this kind of weird table that you roll upon, and there's possibly a weapon malfunction. But but most of the feedback was just unbelievably negative. People absolutely hated it. And and what's kind of really interesting is that I don't think I got one message aside from a comment or maybe a couple of comments on, say, the OSR Facebook group, like most people didn't realize that it was actually kind of taken from an older game.
Oh, really?
Nobody knew that. No, nobody
Oh, I
actually
saw that immediately. It's like Gamma World.
Well, I mean, someone like you would know, I mean, it's actually credited in the back that the table,
Yeah.
the table, it actually was influenced by I think Gamma World.
Yeah.
But nobody knew that, probably because most of the people that were making the comments were like under 35 or something.
Right.
But it was really only a couple of comments that out of God, I just got dozens and dozens, and everybody said,
right, though. If you got that much feedback, you did something right.
Well, everybody said, "Oh, this is really stupid," like it's really dumb, and just feels like really, it feels really pointless to sit here and just keep on rolling d10s, and like, why don't you sort of do a mechanic, like why don't you just make it an intelligence check or something like that? And it was like, and I'd sort of felt like I'd sort of delved, too far back into the history, and what's interesting too, I'm doing this Kickstarter now for Dungeon, this kind of mega dungeon zine, right? And I'm going to commission, as part of the stretch goals, I'm going to commission some original art to include, right?
Yeah.
But the way I'm going to do it is if I can hopefully sort of get like, say 8 pieces of original art, depending on the funding level, I'm actually going to take the idea that was an expedition in the Barrier Peaks, and I think in the Tomb of Horrors, I mean, I could be wrong, where I'm actually going to put all the art at the very end. So it's going to be 8 pages of art, basically with the room numbers at the bottom, so the referee can actually show the players.
Yes.
And I'm sort of wondering what people will say about that. They'll probably think that that's a really bad idea too, of actually not interspersing the art throughout the adventure, but actually all having it at the back in the appendix. Because I actually thought that those kinds of handouts that the TSR people did, with things like Expedition, were just fantastic. They were just absolutely fantastic. So I'm going to sort of try that idea, which again too is influenced by a game from something that came out in the 70s. And I'm sort of expecting to get a lot of negative feedback about that as well. People saying, "Oh, why did you put all the art at the very end? Why did you put 8 pages of art, not have it sort of, on the page of the dungeon or whatever?" So, I mean, I'm okay with that, but in terms of things that I've been kind of influenced by, like it's really, a lot of stuff that's in, the very, very early days of the hobby, like, the 70s, for example, that I actually really like to go that far back in terms of making some of the design choices of what I'm doing.
Well, and I think too, you go to like, excuse me, Dungeon World, I think it is. They didn't have much of an art budget, but they were able to, through layout, and do some interesting things. So I think, right, you can still break up pages and do stuff without having to use art, as well. So I think there's, I think we're all kind of tied into sometimes thinking a certain way. And I've kind of wondered about just ways of using graphical elements when art's lacking, to be able to create a good flow and make pages look distinct.
Yeah, I mean, all those things are things you have to consider, because of course art costs money, right?
Yes.
And it's one of those things that, if you're looking to kind of fill the gaps, and you start sort of working it all out, I mean, you can easily run into, say for a zine, I mean, depending on how much art you wanted to put, say, into a 48-page zine, I mean, you could easily run into, say, a couple of $1,000, in terms of original art commissions, up to, if you're, but it's one of these things, because you want to create a visually rich page other than just walls of text, and then that's another sort of challenge when you're doing a layout. It's kind of like, well, how do you actually fill the gap and actually make, perhaps I wouldn't say you have to make every page spread unique, but how do you sort of just put something in there that will, that will activate the layout? I mean, the obvious thing is to do it with art, but again, too, art costs money, and not everybody has, you know, the budget to do that, you know. And I mean, I didn't, you know, that was one of the reasons that I sort of chose public domain, you know, because I you know, for a Quillis for the first 2 issues, because I just wasn't ready. I didn't feel confident enough that that if I, you know, commissioned art, that I would at least kind of break even.
Right.
From sales, you know, like I didn't really want to take that risk, you know, like in the early days where I basically just didn't even know what I was doing, you know, and then to go and spend, you know, like $1,000 or $2,000 on art was just something, you know, I just simply wasn't ready to do. Wasn't confident enough to do that, you know.
Yeah, well, that's kind of where I'm at. Is I've just I posted on Twitter. Yeah, I'm looking at probably, I mean, when you're only making, let's say your margin's only like say $5 a book, you know,
that's probably about right.
It's like, you know, you got to sell, you know, if you're paying $100, you got to sell that art's got to basically buy you 20 copies to break even, you know. And then you start looking at like that, it's like you really have to start, it really starts becoming pretty significant. And a lot of times if you're not getting the number of backers or people doing it, it's hard to get, because those margins, it doesn't look like the amounts are much, but with those margins, it takes quite a bit of funding to actually pay that off.
Yeah, and you know, and the thing is with art, it just kind of adds up really quickly, you know. And you know, and it's one of those things, like I think with Nightland, I kind of went like a little bit overboard. Like I actually commissioned a lot of art for that, but I was really kind of happy with how it all turned out. But it's just, you know, but it is one of those things that, you know, yeah, you know, I mean, luckily there's Kickstarter, so you know, so that gives you a bit more of an idea of what sort of budget you can have. But look, I mean, the other hard thing I found with kind of artists as well, you know, is because I've got a few things now I'm working on where I have contacted a number of artists. I mean, one of the difficult things I found is just kind of availability, is artists who you want to work with and actually having availability in their schedule. Because I think, you know, good art takes a long time to do. It's very time consuming for an artist. And finding artists that, you know, say you know, I mean, it happened to me a couple of times in the last few weeks where, you know, there are a couple of artists who I've never approached before, never worked with, who I said, well, inquiring about doing, commissions, you know, not many drawings, say, you know, a couple each, but, you know, but the wait time was like, well, you know, I'd love to do it, but I'm kind of busy for the next kind of 6 months or 9 months. I've got kind of too much on, you know, working for this company and this company and doing stuff for this person. And that's kind of one of the other things about, you know, working with artists is it is actually, if they have time to work on your project.
Right. I think if you're looking for people who are in demand and who maybe aren't, because, you know, obviously too, it's like what you're doing, maybe just they're making maybe more money doing other things. So you need to be planning, you know, 6 months or a year ahead.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, that's what I've kind of realize now, that it's really good to plan, like,
but you have to pay them up front, because this is where I'm at, you know. There you can't say, okay, I'm going to do a Kickstarter and then get somebody lined up, because that can throw your Kickstarter way off, you know, if you're planning on a particular person. So I guess we're certain key people you need to know ahead of time. Or if you say, I really want this person to do my cover, and they're a year out or 6 months out, you need to make sure that you commission them early, not after the project funds.
Yeah. I mean, it's something that, you know, depending on your project, but if you were to do something where you really wanted something specific and that's what you wanted to present to backers, then I think that, you know, paying up front, you know, for all anyone that you hired, it is just something, especially with artists, is something that you'd have to kind of bite the bullet and do. It would just simply be too much of a risk to say, well, I'm going to use this artist, and for some reason it just doesn't happen.
Yes.
Like to say, well, we've got this artist lined up, and then kind of your Kickstarter finishes and they said, oh, I'm really sorry, but I've just taken this work on, or something's happened. And then, so that's just, but I have seen, from, just experiences with other, producers of books, who do hire artists, is that I sort of get the sense that most people tend to actually get all the art done before the Kickstarter, and they actually sort of pay out of pocket, and then there's a hope that they do the Kickstarter, and then that kind of just basically then kind of covers everything,
Yeah, that's the way I am doing this one. So
yeah, I mean, I couldn't imagine asking an artist, like, it's something I would never do, but I wouldn't kind of say to an artist ever, like, oh, can you do 5 drawings now? And I'm doing a Kickstarter in 6 months, and when the Kickstarter funds, I'll pay you. That's just something I would never think of doing. I mean, you would have to have, a very particular relationship with the artist, and the artist would have to be, say for example, a prime collaborator with what you're doing. Where it was just kind of mutual ownership, and you sort of went into it saying, well, let's make a book together. You do the art, I do the writing, and whatever happens with the Kickstarter, we'll kind of split it 50-50 or something. After we pay all our expenses. I mean, that can work, but I wouldn't sort of go to someone and say, make 5 drawings for nothing now, and I'll sort of pay you in a year. It just would be like, just, I don't know. It just wouldn't be something I would ever kind of think of doing.
Well, and I think you and we're planning on doing this for a while, and you want good relationships. You don't want to be creating bad relationships.
No. I mean, you want good relationships, and I kind of think that from having worked with artists kind of as a job basically in Australia. I mean, the best way to sort of to maintain a good relationship with artists is to be honourable and pay quickly. That just kind of sums it up. That you just want to, you don't want to kind of negotiate. You want to respect what people want to charge you. Obviously, if it's a really in-demand artist, they're going to charge you more, and you don't just want to haggle with artists. You just want to respect what they think they're worth. And if they're too expensive, then they're too expensive. And then you kind of have to, like, maybe look for someone else. And then when you get the invoice, you just want to pay it quickly. And that's, I think, one of the best ways to kind of work with artists. And it's very simple, but I've sort of found that that's what kind of works. Because then people want to work with you, because they just kind of know that they're going to say, well, how much is a full page illustration? And they say it's 200, and they know you're not going to say, oh, can you do it for 100, or can you do it for whatever?
Your best bet is to say, you know what, it's more than my budget allows for this time. I really want to use you sometime, but I don't
absolutely,
have budget at this time. And they may come down, but you're not haggling with them.
No, that's the best way to do it, because if you can't sort of if it's not within your budget, then it's just not within your budget, and then you just but there will probably be someone that is within your budget who might not be as in demand or as accomplished or have done it for long. And I think you just have to kind of respect that, because I think I think people get paid not much when doing sort of stuff for games, especially in the independent side of game, like word rates and art and whatever and layout. People are paid to do that. And I just think you just kind of if you want to use someone, just kind of just respect what they ask.
Yeah, and that's what's hard, because I think going back to expectations, it's easy for us. When I say us, I mean, we'll just say the little guys looking at the big companies or people doing real well with their Kickstarters and wanting to improve our zine, but that is so costly. And it doesn't, like right now, like for Fate of the Fly God, I've doing a very reasonable rate for developmental editing. Somebody's doing that and some copy editing. I just commissioned a color cover for it.
Right.
I've also I'm going to pay my daughter for, she's also helping with the layout, so she's going to spiff it up. I've got another artist that I paid a lower rate that I'm going to work the Kickstarter so that if it gets past a certain point, he's gonna get, tipped. But anyway, just nothing's out of line here. With this, I think right now I have $700 of art budget. I have $200 in layout, $300 of copy editing. With book costs and me not getting paid a dime, it's going to be $8,000 before I break even, and I'm not even getting paid. So it's just,
and this is something you're going to use Kickstarter to try and fund.
I am. So it's going to fund it. So the thing is, I mean, even though I need to be $8,000 to break even, it's the books are going to could be costing me over $15 a piece to get printed.
How many pages is your book going to be?
It's probably going to be over 100 pages.
So you're going to release it as a hardcover?
No, I'm still trying to work out, see if I can get it. Let's see if I can still get it stapled. But I'm afraid I'm going to have to go perfect bound.
Right. And what, you're going to use Mixam to do this?
No, I'm looking at, there's a company, I forget, in Ann Arbor, and there's also a local company I'm going to talk to.
Right. Yeah, I think it would be very hard to get 100-page book staple bound unless it was oversized, unless it was kind of 8.5 by 11 inches.
Oh, it's actually, that doesn't really matter. No, because you're already doing the stapling through the thickness of the paper. Now the question is, how usable is it? That's the next question. But my wife, I said something to my wife, she showed me a ruled notepad book, and it's thick, and it's actually stitched. And so I think I told her it's probably companies in Taiwan or China. That's what they do, is they mass produce these thick, notebooks.
Yes.
But
I think stitched would definitely work. I'd be sort of cautious about staples on a 100-page book. I'm just wondering how. Yeah, I mean, I think the difficult thing about that in terms of the layout, and this is something that is that the pages, the pages towards the outer part of the book, like the inside cover.
Oh yeah.
Tend to be a lot wider than, say, the pages in the middle.
Oh yeah.
And it's really, they call that the creep, when doing books, and it's really making provisions for that. So your book, when it's printed, it just doesn't look out of whack, which means that, like, the first 20 pages, you might have the right-hand page, you might have the text, like 0.2 inches from the edge. And then sort of as you get into the middle, it goes to 0.4 inches or something like that, because they have to take into account, that the pages, towards the front and the very back are actually a lot bigger. To
take an extreme, let's just say you're wanting to take do a normal zine, and you're wanting to stack 100 sheets of paper, drive a staple through it, fold it in half. Your outside sheets are going to be 5.5 by 8, but your inside might only be like 3 inches wide.
That's right. Yeah. I mean, I think I've looked into it with Mixam, and they say that they can get up to, I think, 68 pages with a staple bound zine. That's 68
pages, right? But I'm going to need I'm probably going to be dealing with maybe 100 and a little over 100, whatever that's going to be. I think. But it's going to be comic book size.
Oh, okay, right, yeah. Well. I mean, I think you could be fine.
Well, yeah, but the thing is in some ways I kind of was wanting this thing to be very usable, and I wasn't necessarily worried about it, but now I'm kind of I don't know. I'm kind of going through a crisis right now, Vasili.
Yeah. Well, look, look, I mean, all those things, you know, like, you know, when doing production just have to be taken into account. You know, it's kind of like, how big is it going to be? The size, you know, do you go hardcover? Do you go perfect bound? You know, all these things are just kind of, yeah, decisions, and you know, they're kind of restrictions that we all have, especially when you're doing sort of independent sort of publishing, you know, when you're paying for it yourself. Because the thing is, you know, with companies like Mixam, you know, when you're doing sort of like a print run of say 100 or 200, and you're getting it done digitally, you know, and you're doing it say zine size, you know, which is whatever it is, you know, 8.3 by 5.5 or whatever, you know, it's incredibly affordable. You know, you can sort of you can sort of make copies for, you know, you can make full color copies for like $2.50, right, per copy. I mean, it's unbelievable, and the quality is unbelievable. You know, because they use an amazing machine called a HP Indigo 7600, which is just astonishing. It's like a $500,000 printer, digital printer, which kind of does, I think, much better work than a 4-color lithographic printer, right? It easily on par, if not better. The color's richer, right? But when you start sort of really upping the ante and then get into, you know, hardcovers and Smith sewn and all that kind of stuff, it becomes incredibly expensive. You know, I mean, the jump is just, I mean, there's an order of magnitude in the jump, you know, and it gets to a point where, you know, if you start doing all that kind of sewn stuff so it lays flat on the table, I mean, it gets to a point where, you know, to really make it worth your while, I mean, you have to be printing like a couple of thousand, you know, because the thing is with, you know, the thing is with digital printing, right? Like I've had a lot of experience with digital because I used to do a lot of publishing back in Australia. And the thing is with digital, you know, if you do 5 copies or if you do 500 copies in digital, there's not really much of a price difference in terms of the individual copy. It's kind of negligible. It's not like nothing, but it's negligible. Because, you know, there's no setup cost to doing digital printing. It's just, you know, it's all basically fed through this kind of, it's sheets fed through basically what's a glorified inkjet printer, right? And a very good one at that. But when you start doing traditional printing where they print off plates, you know, like doing, say, 1,000 copies or 5,000 copies, the difference might be double the price. It's not 5 times the price, right? So there's all these kinds of considerations to make, and I think to kind of I think to, you know, to say work in, say, independently produced RPGs, and to say, you know, make a profit out of it, or to actually come out of it where you actually make some money for yourself, you know, I think there has to be, you know, the volume there. You know, I mean, you have to be, you have to be, I mean, you have to be making like, you have to be making a book for say $5 and selling it for 25 or 30, you know, because that covers, you know, you might be selling it to a distributor where they take 50%, you know, and then you have to pay all your outgoings for the art and stuff like that. So I think you really need kind of the volume, you know, to kind of do it. And I think, you know, the successful Kickstarters sort of get that. Like when you see these, you know, Kickstarters that do like $100,000 or $200,000, I mean, you know, a significant portion of that is going to production, you know, like, you know, but I think that's kind of where, I think that's where, you know, that's where it becomes something where, you know, you can actually make, say, you know, money out of RPGs. But, you know, I think if you're doing like, say, what I do, you know, which is kind of making, you know, books, you know, and kind of, you know, making 48-page books, generally they're about that at the moment. It's kind of like, you know, all the sales and stuff like that, you know, kind of basically, you know, just go back to basically paying for, you know, they go back to paying for your costs, especially if you use original work. And then you actually start kind of making a profit, like, you know, kind of like a year later.
Yes.
But by the sales that happen after that.
Yeah, I think there's, you know, you can, if you're going to continuously, that's just it. That's what's hard. If you're going to continue to do Kickstarters and you keep a backlog of inventory, there's potential for making some money there.
Yeah, I mean, I think what I sort of find is that I have a website where I sell my books, right? You know, there's only 4 listed up there, and, you know, there's a couple more that'll be up there in the next sort of month or so, but there's 4. But I sort of find I do get kind of really regular sales from that, and most people buy more than one book.
Right.
like it's very rare that someone buys one, right? You know, I think it's kind of people, generally buy two, if not kind of all of them, right? And I do get kind of very regular sales on drive-through RPG. Like I think surprising amount of sales on drive-through where people just buy it as a PDF, and I kind of think, well, who'd have thought there'd be just a market for people just buying something digitally? But I think where I think RPGs can become kind of profitable, it's when you have a lot of you just have a lot of content up there. You have a lot of choice. So it's not just one thing. You have like 10 things, and that's where there's just kind of residual sales from kind of everything, because you just don't know what people's taste is going to be. But I think that that's where it kind of, I think that that's where potentially it becomes, viable for someone to say, make a living off producing independent work, is that you just have to have a lot of content.
Well, I think the thing is, I mean, I'm not gonna, I shouldn't speak for you, but I think for you and I, we're dabbling, and our idea is to make some money. But I think if you and I were actually saying, you know what, this needs to be an important part of my income, we'd be making different decisions.
You'd be making different decisions, yeah. I mean, yeah, absolutely. I mean, what I do is kind of like auto kind of stuff. It's like a one-person show that kind of does most things and commission stuff. And that's kind of fine for the time being, but to kind of, get into something that's kind of like a proper business and to get that sort of scale, it really means you really have to, making different kinds of decisions, making different kinds of books. You probably have to be hiring people, because it's simply impossible for someone like me to kind of just make enough content. It's just humanly impossible to kind of, but if you were kind of sitting down and say, if I sort of called for submissions and decided to publish like 5 hardback adventures, then that's but that's a different kind of game altogether.
Yeah, and I do have some ideas for some low graphic content, higher word count type things. I'm going to try explore maybe next year, but well, actually, I just tell you what I'm thinking about. I'll just go ahead and throw this out there, no secret. I'm thinking about doing a project called a zine called Gary's Appendix.
Right.
And
cool.
The idea would be, are you familiar with the Kobold Press books that they put out?
I think I am, like their monster manuals and things like that.
Well, they're like guides to like monster building, guides to.
Oh yeah, I do know those. Yeah.
So something along that format, where so you've read obviously the first edition D&D,
sure,
DM's guide.
Yes.
You know how it's just full of just odds and ends.
Yeah.
Have everybody have groups of people just write essays, and it just be interesting essays, and they don't have to be directly gameable, but just interesting essays. It could be writing about gemstones. It could be writing about, things that you could still be usable in a game, but aren't necessarily have to be gameable. And they would just be interesting articles to read. And then set up, I was thinking about doing is paying everybody up front, like 3 cents a word, and then set up stretch goals to increase the pay at certain levels.
Right. Well, that's a really great idea. And, I mean, you mentioned the DM's guide. I mean, I actually think of that because I did a really, really close reading of that about a year ago, like really close, where I hadn't really read it closely for like, long, since the 80s. And I actually think of that as a collection of blog posts by Gary Gygax.
Yes.
And it's so random, right? Like when you actually think about it, it's so random that I think the very first article in the DM's guide is like about lycanthropy.
Yeah.
I mean, what is that even about? I mean, what is that even about? Like, why would you actually start a DM's guide where one of the very first articles is about lycanthropy? It's just, it really doesn't make any sense. And when you look at it closely, I mean, it's really DM's advice. Like it's really hard. It's really hard to know what kind of rules there are in there that, because it's all sort of buried. It's really, everything's so deeply buried within there. Like, there's no sort of coherent sort of form of any real kind of.
it's not even really DM's advice. It's just here's the
Yeah, I
rules
mean,
for disease and parasites based on the location, your chance of getting a parasite or disease, and a random
yeah.
table determine that. I mean, like, it's interesting, but it's like,
Oh,
but
it's interesting, yeah. But it's really a unique kind of thing in gaming history. I mean, every single article in that book could easily be just an article in Dragon magazine
yes,
of the time, quite easily. But it really is, like, if you think about it, it really would be Gary Gygax's blog posts if he was a blogger, say if he was a blogger in 2007, say, or 2008. That's what it is, because, it's a magnificent book, and it's very, very rich in some, and I love the sort of Gygaxian prose and stuff like that. I mean, it's so unique. It's so wonderful. I mean, the art's great, the cover's great. I mean, it's just kind of a seminal and iconic thing. But on the close reading, I think it's a really strange book.
it is.
I mean, it's a really, really, really strange book. It's
Nothing
kind of
like that will ever happen again.
Nothing like that will ever happen again. And the lenses that I look through it now as kind of a mature person is so different to how I remember it. I just didn't remember it as being so kind of esoteric in a sense, But it's an amazing thing, and I really think people should do a close reading of the book because they'll realize it's just such an oddity,
If I was talking to, I think it was Dan Wilson, if you can imagine a world without an internet, this book would rule. It's all in there. You could dig through it, but now we take it for granted. We can look anything up anytime, but it's kind of like a disjointed encyclopedia of articles.
And it's also about like how to actually run games, like and there are just nuggets that are just buried in there, and that's why you have to do a close reading, because there'll be a sentence in there in some sort of in some article in some in a section about something, and it's kind of really profound advice, but it's just kind of just buried in there. It's just like an odd sentence or something like that. But it's but I think a book like that would be, your book sounds great. I mean, I actually, I think things like that would be, super, super interesting. I mean, I think Knock does that, right? That compilation Knock. I mean, they
does.
Seem,
but there seems to be more directly, not all of them, but seemed very directly like random tables for this or odds and ends that. I'm just talking about just something you just sit down and read, not necessarily look for random tables, not something that's directly gameable, but something that's maybe inspiring or gets people thinking.
Yeah. Well, look, there'd be no shortage of readers for that, because I sort of suspect that I follow a lot of OSR blogs, probably like 50 or 60 or something. But I sort of suspect that generally readership for blogs has gone down.
Yes.
Right. Especially after G+, I think readership for blogs has gone down. And I kind of think that I think forums have kind of probably gone down with some very few exceptions, but I think any sort of conversations or information sharing now tends to be on things like Facebook.
Yes.
Because I just can't, I still look at sort of some forums, like I sometimes go into these like AD&D forums, I think Dragon's Foot, and, I sometimes go into the Goodman Games forums, which used to be active years ago, but there's kind of very little activity on these now. I'm not saying it's nothing, but it's certainly not what it was like, say, 5-6 years ago. And I think
it's either Facebook or it's Discord. That's pretty much, I would say 95% of activities on there.
And something like Discord, I find that really, really difficult to use. Like I find that I really find it difficult to use, because I'm a member of like a bunch of groups, and I occasionally sort of go in there, but I'm just, I don't really interact. I don't really post messages and things, because I'm just not sure. I just can't sort of figure it out. It's kind of like 20 people having a conversation with each other simultaneously.
It's not always clear, right? But it's also,
it's really hard to know where conversations start and stop, and when you reply to things, it's really hard to follow threads. I mean, things like Facebook, is a bit more sort of organized, where you get notifications and you can sort of comment on things and you can post things, and it's, it has a bit more organization. But I think Discord is something like, you know, it really is like going into a room of like 20 or 30 people and they're all talking at the same time. And it's kind of like, you know, you can sort of decide to kind of tune into the person next to you and hear what they have to say and maybe say something. But I find that as kind of as an ongoing, you know, as a platform to engage with on an ongoing basis, I just find, for me, it's completely unusable.
I agree. If you can keep the number, if you just you and your home group, it's perfect.
Yeah.
But anything beyond, when you start getting into 100 people chatting all the time, it's yeah, I'm like you. I find it very disjointing, very discordant.
But having said that, I actually do play a game on Discord, a weekly game on a Sunday. But you know, that's just using Discord video, and there's just a text channel where we just say, "Are we gaming this week? Aren't we? Who's in? Who's out? Whatever." And that's really great, right? So using it for something like that is terrific. But joining a group where there's just like 1,000 members and there's just this of this scroll of text sort of going up, just, you know, when you get to the main chat channel, it's kind of just not for me. You know, it's just it's too confusing.
Yeah, we're getting old.
Indeed.
Those neural pathways, they're rigidly set.
Yeah, well, yeah, they kind of are, but you know, but you know, but I suppose that, you know, for a much younger generation, it just seems to be, you know, it seems to be that there are a lot of really active communities on Discord, like, you know, things like, you know, the Mothership community is unbelievably active, you know, which I'm a member of, and just check out occasionally. Morkborg, you know, there's an OSR group, which just seems, yeah, you know, the you know, the Necrotic Gnome Discord is really active. The Exalted Funeral Discord seems really kind of active as well. But you know, but yeah, you know, you know, I think it's just kind of a rabbit hole, you know, and it's just something I just don't really have the time or the mental bandwidth for at this point in my life.
Well, for me, it's like I don't have a lot of followers on Twitter, and I have all the notifications on. So every time somebody likes, ding ding. Well, I commissioned a person to do the maps for me, and she has a lot of followers and very active, and my phone was like going off all the time. It was like driving me crazy. So
right.
I think if you're a type of person that constantly interacts and get those dopamine hits, or you're the type of person who says, you know what, you know, 5, 6, 7, 8 times an hour for every hour, that's just like, stop. But for people who are into Discord active, I mean, they're constantly checking, and I can't handle the loss of concentration on anything I'm doing to be monitoring something to that degree.
Yeah, it's just something that's too much for me. You know, like, I mean, I have Discords on, you know, Facebook for the OSR groups, and that's kind of enough for me. And Twitter as well, but that's kind of about what my mind has the capacity for, like to actually then introduce another sort of social platform, which you significantly sort of make content for and contribute to. You know, I just think I'll just leave it to others.
Yeah, it just takes too much energy to keep abreast of it. Yeah,
I agree. Yeah,
we need to be writing. Well, I think we're hitting the time space continuum, Vasili. I think we're hitting the 2-hour mark. Or no, hour and a half. Oh no, it's been, yeah. We started at 8, right? So
yeah,
we probably ought to call today.
Cool. Well, it was great chatting to you, Jeff.
Oh, it was an amazing time, Vasili. We'll have to. I don't know if we can find anything else to talk about. Just kidding. We'll have to get together some time and have you back on, and we can find other things to ramble about.
Anytime.
Oh, good luck with your Kickstarter. I'm really looking forward to this.
Thank you so much.
I'm not big into mega dungeons, but a subscription to or quote unquote subscription to an evolving mega dungeon is I think an amazing concept.
Right. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Yeah, and the best to you and your team. Just kidding. But you take care, mister.
Thanks, Jeff.
Where we at? So this will be dropping, if everything goes right, we'll be dropping next week.